The Pharisees went off and plotted how they might entrap Jesus in speech. In his commentary on this particular passage of the sacred scriptures, St. Thomas Aquinas calls the Pharisees stupid. And not just once, but twice. Because who in their right mind could ever imagine that you could trick or entrap someone with a divine mind? You simply can't. That is the height of stupidity. I think we can agree with it. I think the trap, however, as the Pharisees had concocted it, is fairly straightforward. I don't think it's difficult to understand, so we're not going to necessarily belabor that point. But suffice it to say that the Pharisees wanted an elegant yes or no answer to the question, which Jesus Christ did not deliver. But had he delivered it, this is what would have happened. If he would have said, yes, pay the tax to Caesar, then he would be discredited as a prophet. Because many of the Jews, and especially the Pharisees, resented being governed by the Romans. But had he said no, there in the presence of the Jewish Herodians, who were quite comfortable with Roman rule, he would have been immediately denounced and turned over to the authorities, presumably for some kind of prosecution. But Jesus does something that they were not anticipating. Now keep in mind, Jesus knew their malice and saw it coming a mile away. So he asked them the question, show me the coin. This is the first thing I think is really interesting, is that for a group of individuals who did not like Roman rule, who resented it, and who resented paying tax to Caesar, happened to have one of his coins in their pocket. Curious. But nonetheless, so he says, show me the coin. So they produce a coin, they give it to him. Now this is what I really find, entirely fascinating. Because see, here you have Jesus Christ, and he's standing there with this coin in his hand. Now, the scriptures don't tell us anything about the inscription. I mean, Jesus did say, whose image and inscription is this? But we're not told what that inscription said. So, bear this in mind. This is Jesus Christ standing there with a coin in his hand. And the image, of course, is the profile of Tiberius Caesar. And the inscription says, Tiberius Caesar Augustus, son of the divine Augustus. Because remember, his father Augustus declared himself to be a deity, worthy of public veneration. And then it gets even better, because you flip the coin over and it bears his title, the highest of the high priests. Anyway, I just share this with you as it's kind of maybe a fun fact or something like that, but can you appreciate the irony of it all? Jesus Christ holding this coin and what it represents and what it says. But nonetheless, that's not the point. Because at the end of the day, what did Jesus Christ say about paying the tax? Whose image is this? Whose inscription? Well, that's Caesar's. And so to cut to the chase, what's the answer? Give it back. Give it back. Now, we're not going to oversimplify this gospel. Because certainly there is a strong current of truth that in this episode Jesus Christ is affirming the legitimacy of civil authority and their power to collect taxes to provide services for the people they govern. Yes, that is contained in there. But we're not going to belabor that point either. What I want to do right now is get back to that first reading. Maybe it seems completely and utterly unrelated, to the gospel, but not really. Not really. If you have time this week, go back. Read chapter 45 of the book of the prophet Isaiah. That's where the first reading came from. And you may want to start maybe with the end of chapter 44 and go into chapter 46 a bit and try to get a broader context of what's going on. But anyway, to preface my remarks, I have to give you a super fast succession of events in world history so that we understand what God is speaking through the prophet Isaiah. So, as you know, the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom of Israel. They were supplanted by the Babylonians, who then came in and subdued the southern kingdom of Judah, destroyed Jerusalem, overthrew the temple, and led the people into exile back to Babylon. Well, during the 70 years that the Israelites were in exile in Babylon, meanwhile, there's another world power coming into its own. And that would be the Persians. And the Persians eventually come and overwhelm the Babylonians and displace them as the dominant world power. Well, here's the thing, is that Cyrus, king of the Persians, and this is where we get into today's first reading, he notices in his newly conquered lands that were formerly, the possession of the Babylonians, he notices all these Jews. What are all these Jews doing here? And he does something remarkable. He sends them home. He's like, go back. And not only does he send them home, he says, and by the way, here's some cash. Rebuild your temple. You may think, why would he do that? Why would he do that? Well, let's just be honest. I mean, when we study world history, world history is just given to us, in political terms, economic terms, cultural terms, military terms, so on and so forth. We always look at things from the perspective of secondary causes. We never go back to the Lord of history and how divine providence guides the events and the affairs of the human race. And thank goodness we have the sacred scriptures, because that is precisely what gives us the insight. We know the facts of world history, but what the world doesn't know, but we're privileged to be given to know, is how God is continually guiding and caring for and bringing his purpose to its desired end, the end for which he created all things. And so what do we do when we get into this first reading? What's God saying to Cyrus? God's speaking to Cyrus. He says, you don't know me. He says, but I gave you a name and I gave you a title. Do you want to hear something remarkable? Do you know what that title God gave him? We heard it in English, the anointed. I have called Cyrus my anointed. I gave you a name and a title. Well, in Hebrew, that word is Messiah. In Greek, the word is Christos. In English, we know that word as Christ. These are titles that are reserved for the kings of Israel. But nonetheless, God is saying to the king of the Persians, you don't know me, you never met me, I've never even dawned on you. I gave you a name and I gave you a title. And he says, and I took you by the hand and I opened doors before you, and I made other kings run in your service. And we get this beautiful insight into how wonderfully God governs all human events and affairs. It was just a couple days ago, I was listening to one of my favorite commentators on all things political and cultural and social, so on and so forth, who happens to be, very devoutly Roman Catholic and has a very well-formed mind, philosophically, theologically, terrific insight. That's why I appreciate his commentary so much. And every once in a while on his show, he entertains questions from his listeners, and one of his listeners says, when you consider all the things that are going on in the world, how do you stay so joyful? Why are you so positive? And you know what his response was? My belief in divine providence. Belief in divine providence makes me cool as a cucumber. Because my attention is fixed not on secondary causes, what people do, but on the first cause, what God positively wills and permits us to do. Because, see, it's only God, our all-knowing, all-powerful, ever-living God without beginning or end, has absolute knowledge of every single possibility, of every single free action that can be executed by a free human being. And he can take the sum total of that and beautifully and perfectly guide all things to their desired end, the end for which he created all things. Period. Right? Are we clear? Because there are no other alternatives. And so when we look at the mess, which we are not going to belabor, we'll do that another time. But at the end of the day, why do we let ourselves to get so lathered up at what we see going on in the world? When we know, as a fact, we reap what we sow. We reap what we sow. We created this mess. And if we feel as though we are in a trap whose jaws are rapidly closing in upon us, who do we get to blame? But it's not about blaming, because ultimately it's about trusting, right? It's about trusting, and it's about our faithfulness and our not losing our minds. After Mass last night, I'm sitting outside greeting the parishioners as they leave after Mass. And a gentleman comes up to me and engage him, and how are you doing? And, I've been watching a lot of news lately. Someone needs to drill a hole in the top of my head and let all the steam out. I mean, really? I mean, how many times have we gone over this? How many times have we gone over this? Anyway, I mean, no, he's a good, fine, decent man. But it just exemplifies, right? So we're going to get back to the essence of today's gospel. And not how Jesus maneuvered himself through a potential trap. There was no maneuvering. There was no maneuvering. It is what it is. But the very essence of the gospel is something that is so subtle as to be as equally glaringly obvious of what the point that Jesus Christ is making. You see, because the question and the issue revolved around a silly little golden coin that bore the image of its creator. Right? Let that sink in. A silly little coin that bore the image of its creator. Can you think of anything else offhand in all of creation that bears the image of its creator? Is it dawning on you? I mean, is that, you know what I mean? You know where we're going with all this? This little coin, stamped with the image, Tiberius Caesar, give it back. It's his. But give to God what belongs to God. That which has been stamped with his image and his likeness. Give it back. And that's kind of how we all, knit all these things together when we're looking at this confrontation with the Pharisees and what's going on, in the book of the prophet Isaiah and our insight, into the way in which God shapes and directs human history. Because remember, I said it's not a matter of blame; it's a matter of trust. And what God requires that we give back is our faith. God deserves and has a right to our faith. Give it to him.